somewhere?
Sorry, I know that's obnoxious.
Well, it's good to know. So welcome.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
The first item on the agenda is the agenda itself, and I think we're going to have to we'll move some things around. I think since Andy's not here, he made the request that we not do the organizational meeting tonight. Unless someone objects, I think we'll strike that from the agenda. Sounds good. And
How can we have a meeting without organization? But I defer to you, Bruce.
well, we're technically still organized as before, I suppose. So the other agenda item would be perhaps moving the chair's report up before the public forum, because we do have guests tonight to appear at public forum. So, and that's just to welcome Michael and Bryn. Thank you for joining in the fun.
Looking forward to it and meeting you all in person one day as well. I think we're getting closer every day.
So the next meeting we'll organize, and I suppose David or Megan will tell you what each of the committees do, and you can maybe weigh in on that when we get to that point. But you have a month to think about it. Is it a
So
month?
Megan and I have already met with Michael and Bryn to give them a little bit of an orientation about us, what the department does, what the planning commission does generally. So to Bruce's point, if you guys have questions about the committees and want to know more before you kind of toss your ideas into the ring for committee assignments, please be sure to reach out to us.
And you can email any of us as well, or all of us.
Thank you.
Bryn and Michael, for the other planning commissioners who haven't met you yet, would you be willing to give a brief introduction of yourselves?
Sure.
Go ahead, Bryn.
My name is Bryn Martin. I live in Ward 5 and I've lived in Burlington for about 10 years. I am a preschool teacher in the Old North End. And I really look forward to helping our city on this committee.
Hey there, Michael Gaughan. In my day job, I am the executive director of the Vermont Bond Bank, which does infrastructure financing around the state. Have worked in affordable housing finance, as well as sort of real estate economics, for lack of a better way to characterize it, and studied city planning for my master's degree. So pleasure to be here.
Welcome. Okay, we're on to really the only substantive item on our agenda tonight, and that's the presentation by our guests from Hula.
Oh, should we go to public forum?
Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? I made a mistake. I thought it was part of public forum. It's not. So let's open up public forum. Thank you, Megan.
Okay. I see that there are several people here on the meeting. If you are interested in speaking to the committee on public forum items, please use the raise hand function, or if you're on a phone, I think it is *9. I do see one phone-in caller that I think is Sharon Busher, and I'm going to assume she might want to share something. So I'll go ahead and call on Sharon. Sharon, is this you? You should be able to unmute.
Hi, good evening. This is Sharon Busher, but actually, for once in my life, I'm just going to listen.
Okay, great. All right,
So thank you.
great. So then just one more call. I see one more person joined us. If you're interested in speaking to the commission during our public forum, which is happening right now, you can use the raise hand function and I will enable you to speak. Okay. I'm not seeing anything, Bruce, so we can go ahead and move on to, I think the only other item that we had before the presentation was the director's report.
Right, and I have no, oh, so the chair, the director, is the director here?
He is.
Great, there he is.
I'll be very brief. Just note that the city council approved the budget the last Monday of June. I think it was the 28th. So we're off and running. Megan and I and our 2 new staff members, the analytics folks who came from innovation and technology department have joined us, and we are occupying our office space, new office space on the 3rd floor of City Hall. So our offices are now open to the public. Anybody wants to come by and visit, feel free, but know that because we're a small department, you can't guarantee that there's going to be somebody there at any point in time. So it's best to make an appointment if you want to meet with one of us. We also have a new security feature within City Hall and on the 3rd floor. So folks can't just come right into our office space. We need to know that you're coming to be able to let you in. But we're there. The office is open Monday through Friday, and we're working kind of alternate hybrid schedules where some of us are in person, some of us are working remotely. And I hope that as the technology improvements that are anticipated in what I assume will be Contois in the Sharon Busher conference room, we'll be able to move to kind of in-person and hybrid meeting formats in the coming month or 2, but I've not heard any specific prognosis as to when that technology will be up and running. The council had its first in-person meeting last night in the Board of Finance, but they too hope to be able to move to a hybrid format. But I think, is my recollection from the commission's conversation, is that we're going to keep this virtual through the summer, and then come probably in September, we hope to be able to start meeting in person and doing something hybrid again.
Okay, Megan, if you could work your magic, I think we're ready for the next agenda item, which was the former item 6, the presentation by the folks from Hula. Russ Scully and John Kahlo, are you there?
So while they're unmuting, it looks like you're on mute, John. Just a quick piece of background from the staff is that we received this request from the folks at Hula, from Russ and John, to talk to you about a zoning amendment that they have been working on for their kind of neighborhood in the Lakeside Pine Street area of the South End. For Bryn and Michael, we receive requests with great regularity from property owners, business owners, people in the community to consider parts of our zoning ordinance that aren't working or that people would like to see working in a different way. So the Planning Commission is very familiar with people coming to them with requests for reconsideration of parts of our zoning ordinance. What's a little bit different about this is that we're actually receiving this request as a presentation from the group at Hula. We normally hear these as, kind of public forum questions or comments that we then take up as a committee, but this request is a little bit more fully formed. And so we, as staff, invited John and Russ to actually come and give you a presentation on what they're thinking. So I think with that, Bruce, if you'd like, we can turn it over to John and Russ to introduce themselves, and then they should be able to share their screen and a presentation that they've prepared.
Great. Thank you. What I'm going to try to do is
Well, John's bringing that up. I'll do a quick introduction. I'm Russ Scully, founder of Hula, along with my wife, Roxanne. John Kahlo is a member of the Hula team. John was a big part of making this project happen and primarily helping us with project management, permitting, and construction management as well. So John's really very familiar with the Hula construction project from the beginning. And now he's helping us with this new project that we want to present tonight.
Okay. So both Russ and I live in the South End, long time Burlington residents. We both are residents of Ward 5. We both come from good families. Somewhere along the line, we got into this line of work, but here we are. And what we're here to discuss tonight is a proposal to amend the zoning ordinance to insert a mixed-use neighborhood activity center zone district into the central portion of the ELM zone. And what I'd like to do is provide a little bit of context and background, and then sort of just peel the onion back a little bit, keep it at a relatively high level, and then hopefully have some time for some question and answers. Key planning goals we want to talk about is just to really, how can we create affordable multifamily housing to support a growing workforce? And in part, that's, you know, the Hula experience is the example of the growing workforce down here. And really trying to, in addition to being affordable, really try to create a walkable neighborhood, pedestrian friendly, and mixed use with convenient access to neighborhood related services. So, you know, those are those high level goals. Now, I know what some of you are thinking is, boy, haven't we been down this road once before? And the reality is we have. Back in 2015, the city engaged Goody Clancy Associates, went through a master planning process for a rewrite of the Plan BTV South End. And at that time, housing was contemplated for the entire ELM zone. And it was introduced, the concept it was introduced. And quickly, over 6 months, there was, I went back and researched, there must have been a dozen articles in between 7 days and Digger about housing and the negative reaction. And part of that negative reaction, I think, was well-deserved, in that there was I think a legitimate concern that conversion of artist space, studio space, to a higher use residential space would occur without some sort of protections. And there could also be there was a fear of a loss of manufacturing space, as well as that intangible fabric of that has provided the Pine Street corridor with so much of its character. So, you know, here we have, you know, the Plan BTV South End document. And when it finally was published, it is, you know, kind of this schizophrenic document. You know, there was, you know, conflicting visions with regards to housing for the area. Here are some of the direct quotes that kind of reveal that. The South End is a desirable place to live. Residentially zoned areas in the South End are largely built out, yet the enterprise district zoning prohibits any residential uses. The eclectic character and walkability of the neighborhood are attracting city's young professionals and families, and the lack of available housing is negatively impacting the city's inability to attract those same young professionals and companies seeking to hire young professionals. And then it went on to sort of say, you know, gosh, it's really kind of tough to really continue with this line of thinking, given the regional and citywide housing shortage, the economic and environmental importance of locating housing close to workspaces. And this is an interesting one. And this is before the pandemic, but the fundamental shift of the relationship of home and work, which I think post-pandemic, a home is always going to be, now is going to be the new office. So I think, you know, that's really interesting. So when the document was finally published, you know, no surprise, it did not recommend zoning changes to permit housing in the zone. But it's interesting, you know, there's the $64,000 question. You know, are there locations or situations which housing might be appropriate in some parts of the enterprise zone? And that's the question that has intrigued us. And with the redevelopment of Hula and the creation of the types of 21st century manufacturing jobs, intellectually, you know, IT related jobs, you know, that is becoming even more and more important. So this is kind of where we come in, and we really, you know, went back and looked at the situation for that context and how could we really move forward. So from here on out, I want to just frame this discussion using the 5 W's. What are we proposing? Who's involved or who will benefit? Where are we talking about? When do we want it to happen? And why are we doing this? So let's just kind of like quickly walk through what's being proposed. Well, what we're proposing is a zoning designation, you know, within the ELM zone that's going to promote a mixed-use walkable neighborhood. There we go. And we're recommending that the city create a new neighborhood activity center designation for the area. Now, neighborhood activity centers are used elsewhere in the city. It's an existing tool in the city toolbox. You know, there's Cambrian Rise as an example of that. Along Riverside Avenue is a neighborhood activity center. At the intersection of Flynn and Pine, where Small Dog Electronics is, that is that. The McClure Center further down on Pine Street, closer to Queen City Park Road. Those are all in that same designation. And so here's, you know, let's just a little bit more detail. They promote development that combines non-residential and residential uses on a single site. All right, it will allow an increased intensity of development and provide neighborhood-oriented goals and services, employment opportunities within walking and bicycling. So we kind of check all of those boxes. With regards to that increased intensity of development, the existing zone is the enterprise-like manufacturing zone. And really, it provides a reasonably robust level of development. It's got, I think, an 80% lot coverage, 45-foot height, maximum height, FAR of 2. So, I mean, it's. I don't think what we envision for this new neighborhood activity center is a new downtown. And I think that, you know, maybe we could talk about some of the specifics of the development intensity. But in general, I think, you know, we're talking about replicating what's already there. All right, a neighborhood activity center supports transit use. Well, we happen to be right on a bike path as well as a rail, an active rail line. And on the other side of one of the properties is the proposed Champlain Parkway. So there is opportunities here for transit-oriented development. Non-residential uses, you know, again, that we're talking about those could serve the needs of the surrounding residential neighborhoods located on ground floor. This is something that we feel strongly about. The building design should be pedestrian friendly. You know, again, this is, you know, I think consistent with our thinking. Parking is intended to be hidden, and I think we could really talk about, in today's day and age, really trying to move to a post-car existence, and we would be interested to discussing that with the commission as well. So in general, I think the proposed mixed-use zone designation is going to accommodate a wide range of complementary art studio, office, institutional, 21st century manufacturing use. It would also provide a 21st century update of the factory town that Lakeside neighborhood currently enjoys with what was the Queen City Cotton Company, now the Innovation Center. I mean, so it's sort of what goes around comes around, and I think that there's something, you know, very compelling about that. So that's the what. Let's talk a little bit about the who. Over the past 6 months, we've reached out to a variety of South End stakeholders and really kind of engaged them about everything, obviously from the pandemic, but how their businesses are holding up, what's happening with emerging neighborhood trends and needs. What's been surprising is that all of the stakeholders that we spoke to acknowledge the need of affordable workforce housing and they support the goal of creating urban walkable neighborhoods as envisioned by the proposed zoning amendment, which, by the way, we have drafted a proposed amendment and that we have distributed to staff, along with a draft of Appendix A, the use chart, as well as a proposed zoning map, which we'll share with you here. Anyway, back to the groups. Residential neighbors from the Lakeside neighborhood, other individuals from the South End. We've talked with childcare advocates. One of the things that we've learned from employers is that, the two key impediments to increased hiring in Burlington is affordable housing and availability of childcare. And those are two very important aspects. We've talked with Champlain Housing Trust and Evernorth, formerly known as Housing Vermont. And we spoke with artists and makers. We had individual members from SEBA and Generator, including both executive directors, and had a very productive conversation. And not surprisingly, we've also talked with property and business owners, South End employers, and many of them. And they've all endorsed what we're thinking and agreed with our observation about the need for affordable workforce housing. So here's just a couple letters that we received, just supporting, and I just want to flash them up here for a second, but you get the general idea. As we discussed, and without a doubt, the need for additional housing in Burlington is well documented. Please consider this a letter of support and a letter expressing Champlain Housing Trust's interest in a continuing discussion as how they could partner in the creation of affordable housing on the site. Generator basically endorses the idea and wants to continue to collaborate, because in terms of shared collaborative goals and values. Okay, so where? Now, so the picture of the zoning map. Here's the ELM zone in the South End. There's another smaller ELM zone up at on Riverside Avenue where Queen City Steel is, right across from the cemetery there at North Prospect Street. And here's a blow up of the ELM zone. Now, according to the South End Master Plan, the ELM zone is about 225 acres, and it extends from the South Burlington municipal line at the old industrial parkway, Queen City Park Road, all the way up to the rail yard on Maple Street. So that's 225 acres. What we're proposing is a zone district, this neighborhood activity zone, that would be approximately a little bit more than 50 acres, or about 22% of that entire assemblage. So it's drastically different than what was proposed 5 years ago, or here it is looking at it in an aerial photograph. It contains a lot of vacant land. These two parcels are owned by Rick Davis Company. Russ and Roxanne Scully own this. This is owned by the city of Burlington. The Innovation Center has a lava flow of a parking lot. And also, Champlain College also has, so we're talking about properties that are vacant or underutilized. What we're not talking about is the Howard space, the artist space. We're not talking about existing commercial properties on the west side of Pine Street. we're not talking about BED. Actually, in a conversation with David White, David reminded me, he goes, well, it wasn't too long ago that the general manager of BED, had floated the idea of moving down to the McNeil area, and maybe that should be part of a housing redevelopment. Just an idea. But what really motivated us was we were listening to the artists and the makers, and we were really trying to stay out of harm's way. We're trying to solve a problem of creating, and we're trying to answer that question that was posed in the master plan. Are there areas that can support housing without creating undue negative impacts on other uses? And I think the answer to that question is yes. So yeah, this is kind of just restating what I've just mentioned. We got some municipal, institutional, Champlain College, commercial holdings. Doesn't include the soda plant, the Howard space, or those other properties. Okay. The short answer here is, what time is it? We want it now, but we know that's not going to happen. We appreciate that the work that the Planning Commission does, and that you're working in the interest of the overall community, and you got to prioritize your efforts. We also understand that there is a process to follow for a zoning amendment. And having said that, with this presentation, we want this process to start. And given the urgency of the topic, we really would, like this amendment request to be given, a serious look. And we also commit to being an active participant through the process, collaborating with the planning staff, the commission, and the city council as we move through this. So then finally, it's like, so why are we doing this? And I think, there's several things that are happening here. We've got this unremitting housing shortage, and we need to improve the supply and demand dynamics for both rental and for sale. And this isn't just in Burlington, but right across the nation. And we need to really, we're not going to work our way out of our local problem by regulating short-term rentals. We're not going to work our way out of this housing problem by renovating Civil War era housing stock, which the city has got a ton of. I mean, we really need to encourage the production of modern, energy efficient housing. And really kind of that is designed for the cohort that we're trying to attract, this post-college, recent graduate. And we need to do that in a variety of ways. I mean, not to get distracted, and we had this discussion with Megan and David when we met with them, is that, Russ was talking about the type of housing and, where young graduates want to live together and have their own bedroom and maybe a kitchenette, but the kitchen is a communal kitchen, and maybe the bathrooms are communal bathrooms. It's really kind of what he was describing was a dormitory. And so I looked up the definition of dormitory in the zoning ordinance, and the only people that can have a dormitory are colleges and universities. And then I went to the building code and I read the building code definition, and it just describes the physical features. In other words, it's much more generic and permissive. And I think we need to, to the extent that I've heard it said that, a zoning ordinance should do no harm. I mean, we're not doing ourselves any favors when we overly restrict a creative approach to creating housing in a way that really doesn't protect the health, safety, and welfare of the community. So this just kind of a thought. We need to, I think that we have an opportunity to address the negative impacts of climate change. If we can encourage energy efficient housing in a mixed use, walkable neighborhood, we've done a good thing. And this particular area of the city is well positioned. And there is a lot of, and there will be a lot of incentives coming down from the federal government to encourage thoughtful redevelopment, the types of things that I think this proposal envisions. And I also think that in the process, we can do it in a way that doesn't detract from the creative economy, but enhances it. So, and then finally, and it is that, we want to support the existing employment base and emerging job growth in the district. I mean, this is mentioned earlier, employers point to the lack of affordable housing and the lack of affordable childcare. So anyway, that is the 5 W's, and we'd be happy to entertain any questions or comments.
So I think what we can do, and if the commission is okay with this, is just maybe get some initial reactions in free form from the commissioners, and then maybe start a dialogue that way. Does that make sense?
Sure.
John, could you stop sharing your screen just so that we can see all the commissioners?
What do you want me to do?
Yeah, just hit that.
Oh, I can do that.
Great, thank you.
Emily, it looks like you're ready to go, so let's hear it.
Sure. Thanks for the presentation. I participated intimately in the South End plan and was really surprised at how much negativity and backlash there was towards housing. Personally, I advocated to allow housing in the South End, and the response was so strong. So I am totally in support of this project. It makes me really happy to see, a surface parking lot be covered with housing. Our biggest carbon impact as a city is transportation. So if we can locate more workforce housing close to where people work, that actually helps us move the needle for how much carbon we use as a community. So I would say let's move this forward and get some language and start looking at it and get going on it. Godspeed to you getting this. You got me on board. You got a lot of people in the South End who, I think feel very passionately about not having any housing of any kind. And we had boiled it down at the very end of that process of saying, how about just low-income housing that is only for artists in residence with studio space that they're going to live in, and it's going to be for low income. It absolutely supports, what everybody's talking about supporting artists, and we got a over my dead body vibe about it. So again, you have my support. I would encourage the rest of the commission to move this forward with some language so that it can get some airtime and people can come out and weigh in on it, and we can start hashing it out.
Thank you, Emily. So for Michael and Bryn, sort of the background of the South End plan, I think pretty much as a commission, we realized we needed housing, and I think John Kahlo spotted it. The dissonance inside that document was really because we wanted to, but we didn't think we could ever get it off the ground, given the response we got from certain areas, particularly from constituents in the South End. Alex, looks like you.
I have a question for John and Russ. I agree with Emily completely. This is a great proposition to move forward. Like, where does the housing come from? Where the converting and asphalt lots to something like housing, I think is fantastic use. I mean, at least half of the time out of every 24 hours, it sits there empty, or it's not doing much, and it's certainly not permeable. So I guess my question for you is, what's in it for you? What's in it for Hula? What do you what would you like to see happen there? Like for your part?
It's a great question. I mean, so personally, I live really close by. I have the benefit of mostly riding my bike a lot of the days I come down here. I'm a big advocate of just living close to where you work. We've had the Hula buildings have been open now for, I don't know, the first building's been open for 12 months now. We've gotten really intimate with a lot of the tenants here, a lot of the entrepreneurs, the founders, the businesses, the staff, and so on. And there's some interesting things we've done here where this is a really, it's an interesting model that deserves kind of a little bit of a study in a post-COVID world around building an office space that people actually want to come back to work to. And we've been hearing from a lot of other companies in the South End who are really struggling right now, trying to build any sort of attractive incentives to get people out of their homes and back to work. We're sort of having the opposite problem. We're having, steady growth with the numbers of people who are coming in here week after week after week. The number of inquiries are really high. We're just, more and more people are coming in. And I think we have, and not purposely, but I think we've sort of stumbled on a really nice formula for people to have their cake and eat it too. There's a nice flexibility in this atmosphere that allows people to still have some of the things they enjoy about working from home, and some of the things they enjoy about being in the office. And so largely what we've heard is that these are companies that are hiring at an accelerated rate. That's really where we spent our time focused on who was going to spend time here, how we were going to curate the space. We're looking for companies that are growing fast. So we're very intimate with some of the challenges of trying to bring people to Vermont to grow the workforce here. And one of them has been cost of living and just housing availability. So the reason we wanted to do this was mostly to serve that need, really trying to help understand how to reverse some of the effects of cost of living, but also help reverse some of the effects of just low vacancy within Burlington and within the South End by introducing more housing stock. We're really excited about what happened in Cambrian Rise with units came online there. We were really optimistic about City Place and all the units that were projected for downtown. And when we talked to Michael Monti from Champlain Housing Trust, he said, listen, the number, we're short 5,000 units. It's kind of the number that he gave us. And
For his market.
For his market. And we said, listen, that's the market we want to address with this. We're looking for early professionals, 20-something-year-olds, as John said, right out of college, and restaurant and retail staff. I own a couple restaurants. I have some retail businesses in the area. I'm very familiar with the challenges that are imposed with high cost of living to those specific people that get pushed out of Burlington. So we're trying to actually design this project in a way where we're going to build housing that is less than market rate. We're going to try to do that using just creative tools, creative construction materials. And as John alluded to earlier, trying to build environments that allow us to really control the pricing in a way that makes it affordable. And we're going to do that in ways that's similar to what we did with Hula. We shrank the office space of a typical office in Hula because there's so many amenities that you don't need to include in your own office that are already shared. But if we can create sort of those shared amenities of an apartment building, all the apartments don't need to have their own bathrooms, their own kitchens, and so on. We can build units that are attractive for 20-something-year-olds who don't necessarily need all those amenities if it can come at a smaller price tag. So that's generally the sense of this. We own the parking lot across the street. We just feel like there's a better and higher use for that parking lot. The joke that we have internally with our team is that I really didn't even feel great about having to buy that parking lot just to satisfy the parking for this project. So my message to everyone who's working in this building was ride your bike to work so that we don't need to deal with that kind of parking. So the name of that lot over there is called Ride Your Bike LLC. The message behind that is really, we didn't want to have to do this. We feel like it's silly to have to spend money to buy a parking lot just to get all of you to work at Hula. So anyway, I think that helps us. If we can build some density of housing in this part of town, I think it's going to serve well for the Burton Snowboards, the Champlain Chocolates, the Dealer.coms, the other large employers in this general area who would love the opportunity to live closer to work.
You know, just and it kind of goes back to the when question. You know, Emily, appreciate your positive statements. And even if we have the sun on our face and the wind at our back, you know, it's going to take, Russ and I were talking about this before we went on. You know, it could be 6 months just to get this thing through, you know, just the regulatory process to get a zoning amendment. And then there's you know, you need to plan the respective properties. Let's say ride your bike property. There would be a site planning process. Then there will be a local permitting process. Then there will be an Act 250 process. I mean, we're talking about like 2 to 3 years before you see any shovel in the ground. And so it's like, you know, if we all feel, and I'm gratified that you know, that we're still with us, that you know, we need to start now, and because there's a lot of work to be done just to get to that point. And I don't think the housing crisis is going anywhere, you know, anytime soon. It's not going away.
Just a quick note, John, that was a good presentation, but just a thought about the history of Lakeside as a company town. I might want to not emphasize that too much. You know, you don't want people to get the idea that they could be paid in Hula script or something. It's a joke.
No, it's just, to me, it's funny how some things, you know, that come around, you know, that, you know, there was a time in the 50s and 60s and 70s where, you know, America was putting a lot of distance between where they worked and where they lived. But it was only in 1900 that people in the Lakeside neighborhood were walking to their job over here on Lakeside Avenue. And again, now these are quaint. At the time, they were probably considered apartment buildings. You know, now they're quaint, almost single family. But you know what we're, I guess the analogy I'm trying to say is, you know, this is what goes around comes around, and we're trying to really kind of create a contemporary version of that using, you know, modern construction techniques and modern design.
Thank you.
No parking.
No
Look,
parking.
no parking, no cars.
We'll all find that parking is the most exciting topic we talk about. Michael and Bryn, did you have any initial thoughts? And it's okay if you want to wait a little.
I can highlight some things I think that were attractive about what was discussed here. Number one, I think the transit aspect of what was discussed is incredibly interesting, not just because of its obvious close connections to work, but also because of the sort of remote work post-COVID environment where people use Burlington as sort of a satellite location, where their main offices are in, say, New York or something, and they found it convenient to live here with remote work, which has the potential to, you know, further exacerbate a housing crunch. So I think like the focus on all forms of transit and how we sort of accommodate that, this could be sort of a defensive location in that context. I think the other thing is, you know, the housing makes so much sense. I was encouraged to also see a diversity of housing types and ownership and tenure, as was presented there. And then I guess the only thing I would add, and this just may be so implicit in what you're working on, is stormwater. You have a giant impervious site right by the lake. And I think that's a clear benefit that, you know, riding my bike by the Hula site, I know you did some porous pavement or some permeable pavement of some sort there. And I'm sure you're already thinking about that, but I think that'd be a great thing to bring into the discussion as well. And so probably more thoughts as we see a proposal or think through it. It does seem that some of the other neighborhood activity centers are fairly prescriptive or specific. And so maybe this is an opportunity to be a little bit more flexible, focusing perhaps on form. But I guess those are my high level thoughts. Obviously super encouraging.
Thank you, Michael. To your first comment about proximity to the rail line, is that we simultaneously with this initiative, we've been working with Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission and VTrans, and to submit a US DOT, Department of Transportation, planning grant for the RAISE program, Rebuilding America's Infrastructure. And we feel that we have a good story to tell, given the fact that it's not a field of dreams, build it and we'll create the jobs. We've already got that part, going. And it's really now, how do we backfill that with housing and in a proximate manner, but then also how do we connect Burlington as a central hub to the Virgins, the St. Albans, the Rutlands of the world, and we're working with an investor that owns these Bud cars, electric cars, so there's other facets to that are kind of long range planning, but the initial focus is right here on the Ride Your Bike parcel and Rick Davis's parcels, and this proposed area for the NAC zone. And then again, to your other comments, yeah, I think that there's certainly opportunities here to clean up after ourselves and create modern stormwater detention and basically just be responsible in terms of development practices.
Brandon, I see you have your microphone on. Would you like to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say this sounds like some really great ideas. I really love the affordable housing, and I was just wondering if you have any details, because I feel like a lot of people use the phrase affordable housing, and I think that means a lot of different things to different people. Wondering if you could define that at all.
Yeah, there's the development ordinance requires any development having more than 5 dwelling units to dedicate 15% of the dwelling units to an affordable segment of the population, and that's clearly defined in the ordinance. I believe it's like 65 to 80% of median income, adjusted for household size. And so you can count on this project, at least our portion, and I think any developer is required to do that, and we are interested in doing that. In addition, we're interested in that workforce population, which is probably in that 80 to 100, or maybe even a little bit more than 100% of median income. But I think, as Russ said, I think, and what we've experienced here, it's taking kind of a long view, and that it's I don't think it's really kind of critical for Russ to be at the top of the market. I mean, that he really kind of is, I think, authentically interested in providing housing that's going to work for this segment of the population. And so, I mean, maybe a different way of saying that is that we're not interested in creating luxury housing. This is a reconstruction of a parking lot in between the Champlain Parkway and a rail yard. It's perfectly suited for, it can be an attractive and wonderful place to live. But it's not, we're not going after, a move up market, so to speak.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I would say that, I think it's relatively easier, I think, for most housing developers to build sort of market rate or above market rate. Certainly helps to protect their margins, helps to increase cap rates and so on. We're not interested in doing that. And I guess the only thing I can really say to that is that we're excited about the creative challenge. We feel like this is needed. We feel like it's going to be more, this is more of a challenge when it comes to developing houses that we're interested in attacking, mostly because it's more personal to us. These are, it's more directly connected to our other businesses and Hula to help make sure there's housing stock available for this price point. And I feel like that's not as attractive to other developers. So we're interested in taking that part on. And again, that's more of a personal endeavor on our side to do that. It's a little more challenging, but we're also, we're going to be creative about this, and we feel confident that we'll be able to build some things that are really attractive and at the same time affordable.
Bruce, could I just add something really briefly to that? Just because we have a couple of new planning commissioners here, I think it's important to make a few clarifications about what we're talking about here. So John and Russ are bringing us a proposal to reconsider the zoning, which would apply to not only things that they might build on the properties that they own, but also would set the stage for development to occur on any of the parcels where these zoning changes would occur. So one of the things that's always really difficult about these conversations, especially when people like John and Russ come to us with, ideas that they have about what this zoning amendment means to them, is to kind of get into the specifics about what they might want to build or what their sites might, their particular piece of property might be able to accommodate. So one of the challenges for us as a planning commission will be to keep it at a little bit of a higher level and really think about all of the properties that are in that zoning district, what's really right for them and what's really right for kind of the long-term future of how those properties might be used. And then, kind of how does Russ and John's vision fit into that kind of concept for what's appropriate for those sites. So just an important aspect. I've heard stormwater mentioned, and then kind of what we mean by affordable housing. And I think it's just important to note, we're talking at a much higher level of policy than a specific project.
Thanks, Megan.
Right.
Alex.
So, David, I hope this doesn't take too long, but the question, Megan's point, prompts a question for Russ and John, which is, why are you asking for a neighborhood activity center? Why aren't you just asking for a zoning change for, the parcel that you own across from the Innovation Center? And what do you know about the intentions of those other landowners? Like, why ask for a zoning change on behalf of somebody else?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, one is that would be spot zoning, and which is illegal. And we're just with the likelihood of it just wouldn't fly.
And
so
yet, John.
I'm sorry?
And yet.
I think, but we, believe it or not, there's other property owners that share the same feeling. We mentioned Champlain College. They feel the same as we do. Rick Davis, who owns the 2 parcels on Pine Street, feels the same way. So and we have had ongoing discussions with them as well. And in an earlier version of the presentation, I had their names, and I just omitted it because they weren't making the presentation, just Russ and I were. So, but I can assure you that we're not alone. And again, that level of support in terms of who's going to benefit from this or who are the stakeholders, include those 2 entities, as well as the other employers, affordable housing advocates, childcare advocates.
And then Alex, just to add to that, one of the things that we heard when we talked to a number of different people about this idea was there was definitely some concern around potentially if we include other structures and buildings in this general area, there was a concern that those building owners might feel some pressure or some motivation to change the use of their current buildings. So what we were hearing was, this is a great idea. Can we limit it to predominantly open space and underutilized space like surface parking lots? And so, we had the task of drawing the initial sort of boundaries for this new district, which we put some thought into, but we also understood that this wasn't, that we wouldn't be drawing the final boundary lines, that this was going to be a larger discussion. It was going to involve, obviously, all of you, as well as everyone else who has a stake in this change. But to start with, we felt like it was probably it was least impactful on existing building owners if we really just focused or concentrated this effort on open properties and surface parking lots.
Cool. Thank you.
David.
So a couple of thoughts here. One thing I was glad that Russ kind of started to get into this a little bit, but I think having an appreciation for what the concept behind Hula is and what they're trying to achieve there kind of gives you that kind of vision of the innovation district as we originally kind of conceived of it as part of the South End plan. And the South End plan really looks at breaking the enterprise zone into 3 or possibly more separate areas with zoning that is a little bit more precise to what it is we're trying to achieve in those distinct areas. Not painting the whole thing with the same brush as it is today, because it's not a monolith right now. It hasn't evolved that way, and the plan is pretty clear about we don't want it as a community. We don't want it to evolve that way. So what John and Russ are focusing on are what we refer to as the innovation district, the centerpiece of this. As staff, when we begin looking at this, and I've started to look at this already, we really have to understand what are the edges of not only just the core area that John and Russ have kind of put out there for us to think about, but what are some of the adjacent lots? What are the pros and cons of considering some of those? And then what happens outside of that? And how do we address kind of all the needs of this district to help achieve that vision? Because as I think the commissioners who've been around for a while know, we have been getting many requests for zoning changes in all different parts of the enterprise zone to tweak this and tweak that. That is illustrative of the kind of evolution that's taking place there. So rather than doing these as one-offs, we need to think of this whole thing as a whole and how these zoning amendments play out as a whole. I'm really excited with the concept that Russ and John have brought forward to us, because the biggest lift, as we've talked about, is the community engagement, the engagement with the property owners, and knowing that some footwork has been done to engage with several of these property owners about these possibilities. That's going to be really important going forward. But I just kind of make the note from a staff perspective that we still have to look at what happens outside of this too, and make sure all the pieces fit together. I think this is a good start. I'm not entirely convinced the NAC as we understand it is exactly the right tool, but it isn't a concept, and we look forward to working with John and Russ and others to advance this. As some of you may know, we identified this, not this particular request, but the need to work through the rezoning of the enterprise district as like the #1 priority on our work plan for this coming year. So these two stars are well aligned going forward.
That's great.
David, I have a question. I heard a couple of things in your comments, and I'm wondering if we were, let's say the commission were to recommend moving this to staff to work with the Hula group, would you feel like that's an appropriate step in that you sort of mentioned not lopping off pieces of the South End? Is this a big enough piece to take on without some sort of getting off into some more global analysis and study of the entire South End?
Well, I think we need to consider all of the enterprise zone, but in many ways, this is the hardest part. So it's not like, this is a little piece, but we're going to take on this bigger project that is going to necessarily drag things out. I think the nugget here is, what is this innovation district? How does it work? And can we find a way, a palatable way within the community to think about housing types and housing opportunities? Because from the very beginning of this, we've understood not just the community-wide housing is an issue, but housing is an issue from an economic development perspective, and growing the kinds of businesses that we have in the South End, that we want to see more of in the South End. Housing is a huge impediment. So by focusing it in this area, by thinking of thinking of it in terms of building types, and I think we can have a fruitful conversation. And what we do to the north, what we do to the south, is less of a substantive change from what's there today.
I just want to bring you back to that question that was posed in the master plan. Are there locations or situations in which housing may be appropriate in some parts of the enterprise zone? There's like two schools of thought with planning. One is the grand plan, the entire enterprise zone. And then there's another school of thought, which is you're making changes on the margins. And I think, David, what you're kind of focusing on, and I think we all are, is that the latter, is making those changes, addressing a real need, moving forward, but really kind of focusing on those areas that attempt to answer that question that was posed in the planning document in 2019.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that I want to be clear that I don't think that what David was saying was to only take on just the part of the district that you proposed here tonight. I agree with David and with the discussion here that this is probably the right area for us to focus a conversation about what parts of the district make sense for us to think about housing. And it is really the hardest, because it is in a lot of ways the most open-ended part of the enterprise district in terms of its evolution and its opportunity to evolve. That said, we've also just as a commission and a staff spent a tremendous amount of time thinking about the north and south ends around this part of the enterprise district. And I think we've all agreed that it is a pretty high priority effort for us to, I think, nibble around those edges. I think what David was suggesting is that we still need to make changes to what's allowed in terms of the types of commercial activities in both of those parts of the enterprise district. But the changes that we would be contemplating are probably much more nuanced and minor than the types of changes that we would be considering in the Lakeside area of the enterprise district. So I tend to agree with David that I think that if we're dedicating the energy and time and space as a group to having the conversation about the Lakeside area, that doing the kind of additional work to think about the north and south ends of the district won't add that much to the process overall, and would be worth our time to consider.
Right. If we were proposing housing in other parts of the enterprise zone, I think we'd be biting off a lot more. But I think, to Russ's response to Alex's question, really looking at where are the greatest opportunities to do housing here that has the least negative impact to the concerns that I think folks legitimately raised and have for decades about housing in this particular zoning district. So I think there's a way to slice this in a way that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
I just had a quick question for David, just about what you said about breaking up the enterprise district into three or more smaller parts, and that is that I'm not talking about the proposal from John and Russ tonight. I'd like to be sure that there is a continued place for light manufacturing, light industry in the enterprise zone in Burlington, because the more housing you build, the less people will tolerate somebody having a viable business building mandolins in his garage, as we have seen.
Specific example, Alex?
It's an appropriate example. Somebody's running a saw between the hours of 9 and 5 you know, I mean, I don't know that person, but it's an
I do.
appropriate example.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think, you know, manufacturing is
Surfboard
such a different thing than it was when the enterprise zone itself was originally created. It comes in so many shapes and sizes. You know, I think there are a number of businesses that are in Hula that they don't really look like they're making stuff, but they absolutely are. And they absolutely are, you know, essential elements of what does it take to make things in the 21st century. There are going to be other situations where, you know, they're making mandolins or they're blowing glass or they're making, you know, jewelry or other things that, again, they're different scales, different impacts. And we need to have that breadth of opportunity in the enterprise zone where, you know, it's affordable, it's rough and ready space, and it's not going to have a negative impact on adjacent residential uses. So absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm hearing some momentum here, and maybe I'll just throw out a proposed construct that we refer it to staff to work with Hula and see what they come up with and bring it back to us, and perhaps add to that, make it a priority.
I'll make a motion to refer the request to staff to come back to the commission with the starts of a proposal.
Particular.
Okay. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Hi.
Looks unanimous. Motion passes. Okay, thank you, Russ and John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you can stay for the more exciting parts of our meeting. Commissioner items.
The most riveting parts of the meeting.
Emily has her hand raised high, so she's got a riveting commissioner item.
In my endless pursuit to improve recycling in Burlington, I have an update.
Let's hear it.
Is there a
Recycling
question?
toters. You know, we've been trying to track down what's going on with the recycling toters and why we don't have covered recycling toters for commercial buildings per the ordinance that was passed by City Council. And it seems to be a supply side issue with DPW where they cannot keep enough recycling toters in stock to manage the demand of requiring all the commercial more than so many unit buildings and to be in compliance with the ordinance. So I propose that maybe DPW is not the right supplier for recycling toters, and asking the city to manage an inventory of blue recycling toters, well, it isn't working, and it hasn't worked. So possibly we could amend the requirement so that you don't have to have a DPW recycling toter, but you just have to have a blue recycling toter from Lowe's and have a recycling decal on it.
It's about the cover, Emily?
It's about the size. So I'm not sure if that's part of the rental inspection process that is under our purview, but if it is, maybe we could amend that to not have DPW supply the recycling toters.
So we could connect your suggested amendment to Bill Ward and the Department of Permitting and Inspections. The minimum housing code is actually not typically part of the Planning Commission's purview. It was part of your purview only in the context of your work with the Joint Committee. So this actually isn't something that we would consider as a group, but we'd be happy to help connect you to Bill Ward to talk about that as a proposal.
Great. I don't want to die before we get recycling toters. It's my deathbed wish.
Have you spoken to City Council President Max Tracy, who was
Yes, I've
the
spoken
driver?
to all. I worked on the original proposal with Max Tracy. And the
Thank
entire
you.
reason that there is an ordinance and just getting it enforced, getting actually it to be something that's practical and that can be enforced. The amount I've been working on this for 10 years. So anyways, that would be great to get connected to Billboard, because I do believe that if we just changed the requirement to be that you have to provide your own toter, which costs $90 at Lowe's, we could solve a lot of problems, including wastewater issues with stormwater drains being clogged up with recycling in the streets. So yes, please connect me to Billboard. And then my second commissioner item is, I did want to have some more color on the Airbnb numbers. I know that there's been a lot of conversions to the hotel and bed and breakfast conversions that are happening. You know, we've talked about keeping an eye on this to see how many units are being converted. So I'm wondering if staff would be willing to just give us an update on the number of units that have converted, and any other color on it. What are they like? What are the costs of the units? Are these low-income housing units? So we can get a sense of what's happening.
The request to look at what units have been officially permitted. So I think we've talked about a couple of times in the context of the short-term rental work that we just finished as a group, that probably only 24 or so short-term rentals in the city have actually received a zoning permit from the city. So in order to answer the question about what's been converted, we could only focus on those units that have received permits, because all of the other short-term rental units that are operating in the city are doing so in an unregulated way right now. We don't have that information on right now, but we could try to look into it a little bit more for you for a future conversation. And I know that, part of that question was about the term conversion. And I know that we've brought up the issue of housing replacement in the context of short-term rentals before. So I don't know, did anybody follow up with you after the last meeting about the question you had about housing replacement?
No, and that is what I'm looking for is,
Okay.
It feels like that's a policy decision about whether or not to charge housing replacement fees or not for conversions. And I'm wondering where the direction for that comes from.
Yeah,
we've always been the case that we've never charged housing replacement fees because it seems like it's a loss of housing. And when you say a couple dozen units, that's 20 units that are no longer housing. And to build a brand new 20 unit building in Burlington could take a decade. I mean, the process, and we bend over backwards to accommodate a new 20 unit building being built, but we're letting these housing units out the back door. So
yeah.
I'm concerned about it.
Sorry. It's a really good question. And I can tell you that I know that some of the short-term rentals that have actually received zoning permits were like ADUs that were built brand new. And the person who applied for the permit to build the ADU also applied to operate it as a bed and breakfast at the same time. So it's of the couple dozen.
Yep.
Yeah, a couple dozen, not all of them were existing housing units. That said, I mean, we have had this conversation in the context of the short-term rental discussion that, we have hundreds more that are out there that are operating that are unpermitted right now that, many of them fit the description of what you're saying. So on that note, I just wanted to mention that we were invited late last week, excuse me, to present the short-term rental proposal that came out of the joint committee to the city council in a work session last night. So we're getting ready to actually start working with them on that proposal.
Great.
As far as the housing replacement fees, we did follow up with Scott Gustin about this after you raised this question at the last meeting. And you might remember that in the conversation about short-term rentals, we were talking about making short-term rentals a commercial use, specifying that they were a commercial use. Because the way that the housing replacement ordinance is set up, it says that if you're replacing a housing unit with a commercial use is when housing replacement fees apply. The reason that housing replacement fees have not been charged on the majority of the several dozen that have actually gone through the zoning permit process is because they've been permitted as bed and breakfasts, which means that the owner lives on site.
Okay.
And bed and breakfasts aren't considered a commercial use in our zoning ordinance.
Thank you, Megan. This is exactly the kind of information I was looking for. I really appreciate that you followed up on my comments, and you know, that's the kind of detail that I'm looking for. Because I don't think that, you know, if it's owner occupied, I think that that's the direction it's going. So it's helpful to get, because I do get concerned when I hear, you know, 20 units have converted as, you know, 20 housing units that go offline. So.
Yep.
Just wanted to say that to Bryn and Michael, that tonight's meeting for our first meeting was pretty interesting and pretty unusual, that it's not like people don't propose new neighborhood activity centers all the time. They had a presentation by a property owner and his development consultant. There's a lot going on there, a lot to consider. So, you know, sometimes planning commission meetings can be quite dynamic and sometimes they can be technical.
Oh, okay. I'm glad you stopped just short of saying boring there. I thought that's where you were going for a second.
I would not go there.
Good thing.
Any other exciting commissioner items? Okay.
Just note that next two commission meetings are listed on that agenda.
So looks like
27th will be a public hearing. Correct, Megan?
Yeah, it'll be the public hearing that we tried to have at our last meeting when we had the issue with the Zoom link. So we'll try that again.
great. So July 27th. And then
July 27th.
okay, the next item is minutes and communications.
I move that we accept the minutes and the communications.
All right, is there a second to that? Emily?
Could I offer a friendly amendment to that? And just
Yes.
make sure that you're aware that there were 2 additional communications that were posted today online. Normally we would, for Michael and Bryn, normally we would like print you new communications that you get that weren't originally part of the packet, but since we're not meeting in person, we just post them online. So the presentation that John gave tonight and one other communication was posted on the website too.
Right.
Okay, and I would just abstain from any vote on the minutes.
Because you weren't here at the last meeting?
Precisely.
Okay, all in favor of accepting the minutes? Emily? And 2 abstentions, looks like 3. We're unanimous with 2 abstentions. Great. Is there another motion?
I move that we adjourn this meeting of the Planning Commission.
Great. Seconded by Michael, I think, and Emily. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you all. This was good. Looking forward to seeing you all in person.
All right. Thank you all.
Bye.
night.
Good night.